that we're talking about an absolutely monumental shift in the way that organizations are going to have to work to cope with the financial crisis. It will be better in some countries than others. It'll be better in some industries than others. Even in the public sector, we're going to see changes, because when the private sector is heavily hit, the tax take from the private sector will be drastically reduced, and that means there's less money to pay for the public sector. We're all going to be affected. And learning in organizations, at least, is not the number one priority. That's not why organizations exist. It is why universities exist. It's not true of employers. So somehow or other we have to rethink this. And I think that what we can't do is adopt this sort of poor me attitude. Rather a sort of pathetic response. Here's the training person on the left and the finance director on the right. And this is what the training person says. He says, well, look, but surely employees are our greatest asset. And the finance director, who's far too savvy to fall for that one, says, oh yeah, well, what about all these organizations then? And it is these sort of very bland statements like employees are our greatest asset. Well, they are in some organizations, but there are plenty of organizations where other things are much more important in terms of their actual value. And in fact, even more than that, I'd say that you can't say that employees are not your greatest asset. They're much more important than that. One of the differences between Gen Y and the baby boomers is that Gen Y would never regard themselves as an asset of an organization. How demeaning to be regarded as an asset. The only people I know who can be bought and sold by an organization are slaves or footballers. If you can think of any more, but we can't be bought and sold. We are not assets of an organization. So you can't go in with that. You can't go in with that stance. And then the next thing is to say, but surely, training should be seen as an investment, not a cost. Now you've got to remember that every department of every organization is going in saying exactly the same thing. We need more money in the accounting department, because if we invest more money in accounting, then we'll be able to save money in terms of the speed with which we get paid. Or if we invest more in customer service, then we'll lose less employees. Or we invest more in IT, then we'll have a return in terms of the efficiency of the organization. Everybody is saying this. So what you have to do is to be able to answer this question. So, okay, fair enough. If it is an investment, how great is the return, and how confident are you about it? It's no good saying there will be 1,000% ROI. Yeah, okay, well, how certain are you that we're going to get that 1,000% ROI? Well, no. The trouble is we're not really very good at doing this. And somehow we've got to be able to talk the language of the organizations that we work for. And that must be true in universities as much as it is in corporations. It's frightening because people don't go into learning and development because they're very numerate. That's my experience. I must protect myself at that point. But that's not their strength. But I do think we have to become numerate pretty quickly. So we can't meet these pressures just by changing methods. I think we have to distinguish between methods and media very carefully here. That we choose methods because we want to maximize the effectiveness of learning, the pedagogy. But we choose media because we want to make things efficient. And the new pressures, the time, environmental pressures, the cost pressures, are essentially, above all, pressures for greater efficiencies. But, luckily, there's a number of other forces for change which are enablers. And these are things that we know all about in this room, but we have to communicate this message really, really clearly, that technology is the enabler of the change which will allow us to do all the things we talked about earlier. Learning media are evolving rapidly. I didn't know where to stop writing these on here because I would have run out of space. But there are, as you know, media started very slowly, and then the range of media has grown exponentially, so that one thing we know is that in 2010, for example, there will be another 4 or 5 choices we'll have. It's very uncomfortable for people working in learning development to have so many new media, because it makes the whole process of media selection a lot more complicated. It's like the ideal hi-fi is the one with one big knob that just says volume. That's the perfect perfect hi-fi. Unfortunately, learning and development, you just don't have one big knob that says in the classroom, but turn it up, more class. That we actually have to have lots of different knobs, so it begins to look like a cheap hi-fi, which cheap hi-fis always have lots of knobs, and expensive hi-fis have very few, as you know. Not that hi-fi, of course, is a very baby boomer thing. There are hardly any hi-fi shops left now. Baby boomers are the only people that worry about hi-fi. So very quickly, let's rehearse the arguments. We've got new tools. The Web 2.0 tools are obviously very good in their own right, and we can borrow some of these, as people like Jane Hart have encouraged us, take them as they are. But even if we don't, we can take the principles and we can adopt them within organizations in enterprise-wide versions. It's interesting that all the big corporate LMS providers have been announcing social networking platforms within their LMSs, which is a sign that they realize that there is some importance in that. Whether that's the right way of going I'll leave that up to you, but that is a possibility. But what is really intriguing is the uptake of open source software within corporations. This is really startling. One of my colleagues, he's probably here I think this evening. Is Steve Raisin here today? From Keynote? Yeah. Will tell you about how many hundreds of their clients are using Moodle within big corporations to run learning solutions. When many of them have also got big, expensive LMSs as well. So it's interesting how that is having an effect. The whole cost, the cost of entry has gone down dramatically. I've got clients which are really far too small, you would have thought, to be doing e-learning, who are now able to enter this market with very little cost. And the rapid development tools are making it possible. I think that genuinely have got to the point where it's possible for teachers, trainers, generalists, as well as subject matter experts, to make a decent job of putting together rapid material. They do need training, hopefully not in the classroom, but they do need training in order to do that. And what's even more exciting is, of course, that even what we would have regarded as the absolute high-end 3D virtual worlds, they are more accessible. We already heard a lot today about Second Life and how the synchronous virtual worlds are very accessible to us. But it's also becoming possible, and Caspian's a good example of what they're doing with their Thinking Worlds platform, that it is also possible to create bespoke virtual worlds really at a very affordable price and a very realistic time. I think to just quickly reflect on the fact that the proliferation of devices is also extremely important. More than half of people at work away from desks. You can't reach them with a desktop computer. So we can reach them now with mobiles. It almost goes without saying that this is really the delivery platform of the future. But even the desktop computers are becoming cheaper and cheaper. This is the one laptop per child computer, I think, which is around $200 a time. But these everybody will have a computer. The idea of a digital divide where, some people can't afford computers is seeming an almost ridiculous point. In fact, probably the only people I know who don't have computers are very much middle class, because they still regard it as something rather beneath them to have a computer, just as they sometimes think it rather beneath them to have a television, they might have thought a few years ago. But it certainly is not a problem lower down the social ladder. And it's what I love as well, because I'm a fairly creative person. I like taking photos and videos and doing this sort of making music. This is also unbelievably cheap to do. When I first got involved in corporate video, which is back when I first knew Donald, we used to charge £1,000 a minute to make corporate video. That was in 1983. I think probably in 2008 we'd be talking about charging £1,000 an hour. The whole thing has become radically that much cheaper. In fact, even a broadcast quality, high definition camera, which you'll see on the screen in front of you there, that only costs, about £1,200. So that the technology is unbelievably accessible. Not that you need it for the web, that is. And, of course, bandwidth is dramatically important, because increases in bandwidth are bringing us out of a world purely of text into a rich media world of audio and video. And I'm really pleased to see video becoming a much more dominant part of the mix, and does provide learning and development departments with a fantastic fantastically more exciting way of communicating information than doing it all textually. Not just top-down, but coming from the bottom up in the organization. Okay, now this particular guy is not somebody I would want to I wouldn't want this person to call me into their office